Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, December 14th. In this week's show, we'll start with a recent announcement from Canadian commissioners calling for a system of transparency by default. Following that, with local journalism initiative stories from across Canada, including one from The Pointer that sheds light on a failing proactive disclosure process in a local town council. And we'll wrap with a recap of the fallout from Alberta's legislative changes. As always, you can find the full stories by clicking the links in the show notes or visiting our website. Stay tuned as we unpack these stories and more. We begin with a significant call from Canadian commissioners for a transparency by default system, where proactive disclosure becomes the norm, not the exception. In releases, commissioners argue this shift would ensure government bodies consistently share information, strengthening trust and accountability. FIPA wholeheartedly supports this call, although cautiously. Our ongoing activities reveal troubling scenarios. While there are good actors, there are also very bad ones. Increasingly, bureaucracies and elected officials are moving fast and breaking things. Not only are records failing to be maintained, but some steps are actively taken to avoid creating them at all. Access and transparency rely on sound information management in the creation of records. As verbal government practices grow, the impact and reliance on what has been called policies and guides by PowerPoint fail the public interest at every turn. Transparency by default is an excellent aspiration encouraging proactive disclosure, but it depends on records being created, robust distribution systems, and does not replace the need and ability to respond to emerging requests in a timely manner. And now looking to some local journalism initiative stories. First up, from Ed Smith, LJI reporter at The Pointer. In St. Catharines, a recent investigation by The Pointer highlights a failing proactive disclosure process in the town council. Key documents remain clouded in secrecy, making it difficult for residents to access decisions that impact their community. The file sharing system the council uses is called SugarSync and is designed to securely share files across multiple devices, making it an ideal tool for city staff to provide councilors with access to confidential documents from home. However, these documents are managed by senior staff and are not easily accessible to the public. It's also hard to imagine most residents are aware of SugarSync's existence or how to access its contents, information meant to serve the public interest. From David Briggs, LJA reporter at baytoday.ca. In Mattawa, a former CAO is making a $1 million claim. In a wrongful dismissal civil suit, former CAO of Mattawa, Francine Desémont, is seeking damages for the town's, quote, breach of privacy, including compensations for injury to dignity, feelings, and self-respect, end quote. The release of information surrounding high-profile dismissals is a frequent access and privacy conflict highlighted in this story. They often spark debate about accountability and decision-making within local government, as well as the right of individuals to be forgotten. The case will be tried at the North Bay Courthouse on a yet-to-be-announced date. From Andrew Wilton, LJI reporter at the Sarnia Journal, comes a story that also highlights the tension between access and privacy. A grieving father is organizing protests outside Blue Water Health following his daughter's death. The call for action follows the death of his 24-year-old daughter who was suffering from a mental health crisis and went to Blue Water Health on the day of her death. She frequented the clinic, so her father believes she got turned away because they weren't taking her seriously, leading to the protests. The family is raising questions about transparency in medical care, calling for more accountability and disclosure from healthcare institutions. In a statement to the Journal, Blue Water Health said that due to being bound by strict privacy laws, they cannot share any information that could identify individuals or disclose specifics about particular situations. And now shifting to stories in the United States. A federal appeals court upheld a law that could require the sale or outright ban of TikTok in the United States. The law requires that the company either cuts its ties with its China-based parent company or be banned. The court says the decision is solely to protect free speech from China and to limit their ability to gather data on people in the United States. It is expected TikTok and ByteDance, the parent company, will appeal to the Supreme Court, although it's unclear whether the court will take up the case. The case marks a significant moment at the intersection of technology, privacy, and antitrust regulation, as concerns around user data and national security intensify. Former U.S. President Donald Trump announced plans to name Andrew Ferguson as head of the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, replacing Lina Khan. Khan, who blocked billions of dollars worth of corporate acquisitions and sued Amazon and Meta while alleging anti-competitive behavior. Ferguson, a Republican commissioner, is positioned as standing up to big tech censorship and for freedom of information. He said he is expected to steer the FTC toward a more business-friendly approach and is anticipated to operate the agency with a lighter touch when it comes to antitrust enforcement. Michigan Democrats are advancing legislation to protect reproductive health data amid concerns over Republican control of the House. The proposed laws aim to safeguard sensitive information from being accessed or misused, particularly in the post-Roe landscape. This would include data logged on menstrual cycle tracking apps. Other states have similar laws aimed at keeping the data from being used to target people seeking abortions. Advocates argue these protections are essential to maintain privacy and ensure residents can access reproductive care without fear of surveillance or legal consequences. Republicans have opposed the digital privacy bill over a section they say will stifle anti-abortion advertising. If you are looking for more information on this topic from a Canadian perspective, we were grateful to have Cynthia Koo provide a deep dive on U.S. reproductive rights as a privacy issue in a prior commentary. Be sure to check out the links in the show notes to find that episode. The Montana Supreme Court has upheld a lower court ruling that allows gender-affirming care for minors to continue in the state. The court made their decision, citing that the right to privacy included the right to make personal medical decisions free from government interference. The decision comes as a win for advocates, ensuring access to critical health care for transgender youth despite legislative attempts to ban such care. Opponents of the law argue that it infringes on parental rights and medical autonomy. Proponents of the law say the mental and physical harm would be greater than the risk of experimental treatment like the opposition worries about. And now turning to international news. Following up in a story from last week in Mexico, the President Claudia Sheinbaum has announced pay raises for soldiers following the elimination of oversight agencies citing money-saving measures. Critics argue that removing these agencies undermines transparency, raising concerns about unchecked military power. Sheinbaum also argues that the government can more efficiently handle functions like freedom of information requests. Last week, Mexico's Congress also approved charging every cruise ship passenger a $42 immigration fee, with much of that money also going to the armed forces. In the Bahamas, the police commissioner has resigned after U.S. indictments implicated officers in a massive drug trafficking case. The Bahamas have not appointed a new commissioner, but the current one says he supports a government proposal for independent civilian oversight of the police department. He also announced several measures, including the creation of an encrypted and anonymous whistleblower system to crack down on corruption. The scandal underscores ongoing challenges with corruption and accountability in law enforcement. Finally, in Alberta, recent legislative changes continue to raise red flags among access and privacy advocates. First, Bill 33 and 34 passed into law at the end of the fall legislative session, a move that some watchdogs say could curtail transparency and accountability. Concerns remain about rushed decision-making without adequate public input. Despite warnings from advocates, the government proceeded with changes. Earlier this week, we did a deep dive on Bills 33 and 34 in Alberta. Joining us were FIPA President Mike Larson and Samantha De La Chantos from Fasken LLP. The interview dives into the details, but here's a quick excerpt of what to watch for going forward.
Well, it's obviously early days, right? I mean, this really hasn't even started to have an effect. So just to keep an eye on trends, right? I think I'm looking forward to hearing from journalists. I'm looking forward to hearing from privacy professionals and from public bodies and requesters. in Alberta. And I would, by the way, I would, if we have the opportunity, invite people to reach out to FIPA as they're experiencing changes into this act and kind of share those experiences with us. And also looking forward to seeing what the commissioner has to say about this. The resourcing issue that Sam has highlighted, I think, is a huge one because access shops are traditionally, that's the term we use to describe the offices within public bodies that handle access and privacy issues quite often. They're traditionally under-resourced in general. It's never been a place where people are pouring a lot of funding. You have a high turnover of staff in a lot of access units. And when you combine that with a change in legislation and then some additional requirements here, you can have some bad outcomes even without bad intentions, right? Just because people are trying to bootstrap the existing resources to deal with new issues. So very curious to see how that's going to go. And my final point, I think the next time that in any province, anyone who's listening to this, any province where access and privacy legislation is kind of up for consideration, remember it can happen this quickly. It could like you can have some pretty fundamental changes in a fairly short window of time without much in the way of public discussion. There's very few media articles that have dealt with the changes in Alberta. It just had kind of slipped under the radar. So, keep on top of it.
I think I would just reiterate that, there's a lot more to come. There's a lot more guidance. There's a lot more direction. And keeping an eye on that is, I think, really important because it will inform us and public bodies as to what the next steps really are.
You can find the links to the full commentary in the show notes. We can also say we are planning to bring you a direct discussion with the commissioner in the new year. That brings us to the end of this episode of Access and Privacy Online. As a reminder, FIPA will be holding its annual general meeting this coming Tuesday, December 17th. Be sure to check out the link to the AGM notice in the show notes. We are well into the holiday season, which means we're starting work on our year in review and year ahead interviews. We'll have more updates for you in the next week's episode. We hope you found today's stories insightful and helpful in staying informed about the latest issues surrounding privacy, information management, and public transparency. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring or consider a donation. As always, a big FIPA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and outlets that make this podcast possible. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music in today's show was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. Be sure to check back next week for our take on the stories in the information field that impact you. Stay safe and stay informed.